Hello again, everyone. You're joining us for another episode of Executive Platform's Blueprint podcast series. My name is Jeff Mix. I'm head of content and research. My guest today is Dr. Kelly Richmond Pope. She's a professor with DePaul University. She is an author, a documentarian. She is also a national instructor with Becker. We're going to be having a conversation on fraud. I'm so excited for this conversation. I usually don't get to talk to authors, let alone documentarians, let alone fraud experts. Kelly, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
I teased it a little bit, but I am actually really excited about this. Last year, I understand the Harvard Business Review published a book.
They did.
Could you give us the title and tell us about it?
Absolutely. So on March 21st, my second book came out called Fool Me Once, Scam Stories and Secrets from the $1 Trillion Fraud Industry. And I have been doing fraud research for a very long time. I don't want to date myself. And what I started to notice was it seemed that the way we always talked about fraud is everyone steals for greed. And I wanted to add a new lens to understanding perpetrators, prey, and victims. So that was one motivation. Like you said, I teach at DePaul University, and I teach a graduate forensic accounting class. And so we have white-collar offenders, victims of fraud, and whistleblowers that come to class and share their stories. And so over the years, I've watched how my students respond to the various people that come to class, and their reactions change. And what I started to notice was all perpetrators are not created equal. All whistleblowers are not created equal. So I came up with this fraud archetype system that I talk about in my book, and that was the second inspiration. The third inspiration really came from, I did a documentary called All the Queen's Horses. And what this documentary does is chronicles the largest municipal fraud in U.S. history. So there's a woman by the name of Rita Crunwell, who was the ex-comptroller, or for all intents and purposes, the CFO of the town. And she embezzled $53.7 million over 20 years in plain sight. No one knew. And so I did a documentary about how does this happen? And I wanted to look at the fraud village, because I believe fraud happens in a village. It's not just one person, but there's a host of things that go wrong that allow a person to believe that they can steal and get away with it. So I did this documentary, and it came out in 2017. And so Rita Crunwell embezzled the money, and she was sentenced 19 years and 7 months in federal prison. And then something called COVID happened. And when COVID happened, there were inmates that were writing into the federal government to ask if they could be released under the compassionate release program due to COVID. And so Rita was one of the people that wrote in, and believe it or not, she got out of prison early. And when she got out of prison early, so many people started writing to me and saying, "Are you going to do another documentary?" And I said, "Absolutely not, but I can write something." So that was my answer to what happened with the Dixon fraud, what happened with Rita getting released early. And so I wrote a book. So her story and the Dixon fraud is the through story throughout the entire book. And so that was the third inspiration.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, maybe my first question should be, who is the intended audience? Now, is this meant for an academic audience? Is it meant for your students? Is it mentioned for a public audience? Is it for business readers? Who did you intend to read it?
I'll tell you, I'll answer that in the fun way. You can find the book in the airport. So if you go to a Hudson Inc., you will see Fool Me Once on the shelf, which is really cool. So when it first came out, I was going around to all the airports because I was like on a little mini book tour. So I would go see it in San Francisco, I'd see it in Florida, I'd see it in Maryland, I'd take a picture. So it's intended for all of us. We're all impacted by fraud, and it's one of the reasons why we need sound internal controls, not only to protect those that steal, but those that don't. We all have temptations. So it's for anybody. I am an academic by training, but it's not an academic book. It's a story-driven, character-driven book. So the way I wrote it was based on all of these interviews I've done. So I told you we have speakers that come to class, and I'm writing to people in federal prison knowing that they're getting ready to get out. Will you come to class and share your story? I write to whistleblowers, victims, and so these are like real people, real stories that come to class. So I have a relationship with everybody in the book, and so that was really why it's so personal and so real.
I can imagine, obviously, it starts off with the story of what happened, but there's also going to be things to keep in mind for readers to avoid fraud. Maybe we can talk about some of the takeaways from the book.
Sure. So I'll talk about how it's organized first, and then I answer your question.
Please.
So it's 3 sections: perpetrators, prey, and victims. So with the perpetrator section, I define that there are 3 types of perpetrators. So everyone doesn't steal just for greed. But the people that we typically read about, hear about in the media, are intentional perpetrators. Those are people that know the ins and outs of a system, they know the weaknesses in the system, and they use those weaknesses to exploit it for personal gain. The Bernard Madoffs of the world, or your Enron C-suite. Intentional perpetrators. But there's some people that find themselves wrapped up in a fraud, and they really didn't intend to be there. Those are accidental perpetrators. And so a lot of times those can be CPAs, CFOs, attorneys, doctors. They're the people pleasers. They're the team players. They are the people that you're asked to do something, you're asked to sign something. You didn't read it, but you trust the person that asked you. You signed it, and then you realize, oh my goodness, I am involved in this financial statement fraud that I really didn't know anything about, and I didn't receive any personal gain from it, but now I'm involved in this situation. That's an accidental perpetrator. The third category is a righteous perpetrator. A righteous perpetrator is a person within an organization that has the power and privilege to avoid the rules. So they may be an executive, and they may decide, I want to help a friend get a loan. I'll get a bank loan. And they don't have everything that they need, but it's okay. I'll vouch for them. They don't have to follow the rules because I have all the privilege and power within this organization, and I can make this loan happen. It's not the right thing to do, but they believe that they are helping someone. So they typically follow the Robin Hood syndrome, where they rob from the rich to give to the poor. That's a righteous perpetrator. So what you notice, and I haven't done any studies on this, but I will one day, is looking at the sentencing for the various categories. Intentional perpetrators, I would argue, are sentenced heavier than the accidentals and the righteous because their motivations, their rationalizations and motivations are different. So I created a game that tells you what type of perpetrator you would be if you were ever to find yourself in a fraud. I'll give you the game so you can say, are you an intentional perpetrator, an accidental perpetrator, or a righteous perpetrator?
Okay.
So with the whistleblower category, I do a similar categorization. There are such things as accidental whistleblowers. You can be a vigilante whistleblower, or you can be a noble whistleblower. And the reason why I wanted to create the whistleblower categories was very similar to the perpetrator category. All whistleblowers are not these disgruntled employees that are trying to attack their companies. Some people are just doing their job, and they realize a discrepancy and they report it. They didn't have a vendetta against the company. They just report it because they noticed some discrepancy. And that was the whistleblower in my documentary. Her name was Kathy Swanson. And she happened to notice that Rita Crunwell had these withdrawals going into an account that she was unaware of. And so she noticed it, stayed quiet for a few days, and then said something to the mayor of the town. And that's how the fraud was discovered. Kathy never suspected that Rita was doing anything wrong. She just saw these odd transactions and did something about it. Accidental perpetrator.
So which kind of whistleblower would that make her?
That would make her an accidental whistleblower. Now, a noble whistleblower is a person that's involved in a group, and they are asked to turn a blind eye to something that they know is wrong. So everyone on, let's say, a safety team knows these are the protocols that we have to follow. But the team decided we're going to take some shortcuts so we can get the job done faster, quicker. And one person says, no, those aren't the rules. We're not following it. And this person speaks up. That would be a noble whistleblower. And when they do that, everyone turns on them. And what's interesting about the noble whistleblower and really the accidental whistleblower is they don't organically agree with being whistleblowers because they're just doing their jobs. Now, the vigilante whistleblower category, that's the category where when you think about whistleblower, what word, I'm going to ask, not you, but what do you think most people think? When you say whistleblower, is it something positive or something negative?
Negative.
Negative. What terms do you think come when you say something negative?
Well, I mean, I think they're probably going to be persecuted for doing what they're doing.
Right. So, snitch, tattletale, things like that. Those are some of the descriptors, right? And that is a vigilante whistleblower. And so most people think all whistleblowers are these snitches, rat, tattletale, snake in the grass. They're not. That is a category, but everyone is not that. So I wanted to open the space so that people could understand that people fall in different categories in the perpetrator and the whistleblower category. So and then the middle part of my book is about victims, and so there's innocent bystanders and organizational targets. And so they are just what they sound like they are by the definition.
Well, I mean, it sounds like a really interesting way of breaking down and walking through some of the factors in play and what motivates people to do things. I do imagine when people are reading this, they're saying, well, how can I either avoid this happening to me or to my organization, or should I be on the lookout for this behavior in my peers, or, is that part of what you're doing as well?
I do. At the end of each chapter, my editor was very adamant by saying, what are the takeaways of each chapter? And so they're chapter takeaways, but really the overall takeaway is pay attention to your internal controls. Pay attention to them, have them, make sure everyone understands them. Make sure you have internal whistleblower policies, not only that you have them, but people understand how to use them. Because most of the time when a fraud happens, somebody saw it. Someone knew it. They just didn't say anything. Maybe they didn't feel safe, so you want to make sure you create a culture where people feel like they can talk to you or talk to someone. So that's really the overall theme of the book. And I think it's things that we know, but we need to see examples of what happens when it goes wrong. So the book is filled with stories and examples of what happens when things go wrong.
Well, and I think that makes a ton of sense, because people hypothetically understand what fraud is, but can they imagine it in their own business or their own life?
Right. You never think that the person that you work alongside could do something wrong, but they can. And people face all types of pressures that you just don't know about. So that's why we need internal controls.
Right. During my introduction, I mentioned that you were a national instructor with Becker. Actually, just before the camera started rolling, Becker very nicely gave me a pair of socks. I wonder if we can walk through what Becker does and what being a national instructor consists of.
Sure. So I'm a CPA, certified public accountant, and what we do at Becker is provide resources to help people pass those important exams, the CPA exam, the CMA exam, the EA exam. And being a national instructor was really important to me because I'm a Becker alum. I am a CPA because I was a Becker student. So my story was a little different because I graduated from North Carolina A&T State University in Greensboro, North Carolina. I was an accounting major. And my father was a professor, so I went straight through school. My dad said, hey, Kelly, you should go get your PhD. I got my PhD. I got my master's in accounting. I got my PhD in accounting. Now, I did not sit for the CPA exam, so went straight through school. Once I finished my PhD, I was a professor at the University of North Carolina at Greensboro for 4 years. And then we moved to the Chicago area after my husband finished his MBA. And I remember when I was moving, I called a partner at KPMG and I said, hey, I think I want to go into forensic accounting. I want something different. I want to change. So I remember Joe Spinelli saying, well, you need to take the CPA exam. And I said, really? Like, I have a master's in accounting. I have a PhD in accounting. I've been a professor. Like, do I need to take the CPA exam? And he's like, yeah, you do. And it should be easy. Since you've all those things, it should be easy for you to do. So the first thing I did was take a Becker course, a Becker review course. And I remember taking it. It was in Cary, North Carolina. I went for 3 months and it was the best course. So I was a Becker student. So having the opportunity to be a Becker instructor now is just full circle moment. So having an impact on people's lives, like I remember who my instructors were. So I hope that I can have that type of memorable impact on someone's CPA journey. So we do that, but then we also do professional education as well. So we have continuing professional education courses. So you might see one of my fraud courses if you're really interested. And I try to tell a lot of stories. I find myself in really odd places. So I love to pepper my courses with the very interesting people that I meet and the adventures that we go on. So we take people to prison. We go into prison. I mean, it's wild, some of the things that I try to incorporate in the courses, but just to make them interesting.
I can imagine there are a lot of financial teams out there that are trying to do, continued professional development and educate their team and upskill them, and it can come across a little dry. I mean, watch this webinar on your Saturday and come in and tell us how it went. That doesn't seem particularly engaging. I think Becker's continuing education may be an example of how to make that a little more palatable. Would that be a fair statement?
I think it's a fair statement. I don't think I'm boring. I think I have plenty of fun to share. So no, it's good. I mean, we try to include courses that you need. that make you better at you, a better version of you. So we have the technical courses, but we also have the courses about what's your Myers-Briggs personality trait. What are you? How can I learn more about you? So we have all kinds of courses. So I love to learn, and so I love to share my learning. So it's just like a great place for me.
I know I have a lot of conversation with finance professionals where they're saying, what is expected of me and my organization is changing. The companies want more from their finance teams, and I can see professional development through an organization like yours as being a real resource there.
I think it is. I mean, what's great is you can get better at almost anything you want. And so we have a huge library of courses that you can take: technical, tax, professional development, anything really is there. So I love that it's this on-demand learning when you want it. If it's during the middle of the workday or if it's Saturday afternoon, we have it. So I think it's great.
So what does getting started look like? If I am a person who is interested in taking my exam, or perhaps I've already got it and this is how I'm going to remain current, or maybe it's something that I'm a leader of a finance organization and I want to make this available to my team, how do I get that wheel in motion?
Your first start is going to the website, and Becker.com it's organized for whatever you're looking for. So if you're that exam candidate, you know where to go. If you're that professional candidate looking for courses to just better you, you know where to go. So it's an easy, user-friendly website to start with. So I would say that would be the first place.
Well, that sounds terrific, and I encourage everybody to visit Becker's website. It sounds like it's a real resource that you can sort of pick and choose your own adventure.
That's right.
I do want to circle back just for a second because, you're an author, you're a documentarian, you're a professor, you're working with Becker to put together course material that sounds really interesting and engaging. Do you have any current projects on the go you want to talk about?
Yes, I do. I'm glad you asked. So I am working on another film project. One of the things that happened during my book release is I did a lot of PR. So I did an interview for NPR TED Radio. And I was just talking about the book and really spent a lot of time talking about accidental perpetrators. And so a couple reached out to me to share their story. And that often happens where I say something that resonates, and so someone will reach out and share their story. So this woman by the name of Sherry Ann Jenkins, Dr. Sherry Ann Jenkins, reached out to me. And she said, I have a story to share with you. Would you be interested in listening? So my ears were just like, yeah, sure, tell me. She says, well, my husband and I were convicted of a crime that we feel like we were wrongfully accused. I'd like to share it with you. And I said, I'd love to hear more. So Dr. Sherry Ann said, we never falsely diagnosed anyone with Alzheimer's. And that was a question that I wanted to ask her. But people say that she did. So part of the documentary is really trying to understand what happened here. And I remember when I read the headline, I said to myself, who would do that? How could someone do that? So I flew to Atlanta, and my team that I work with, we flew to Atlanta, my co-director, Margaret Byrne, and we met this couple, and we did their first initial interview. And they shared with us how it happened, how their story happened, and how it was really a media situation of we didn't falsely accuse people of Alzheimer's. What happened is what they're saying that happened is Sherry Ann Jenkins was a PhD, and she was the person that was seeing the patients. Dr. Oliver Jenkins is an ear, nose, and throat surgeon. He was the referring physician on record. And so Sherry Ann really shouldn't have been seeing many of the patients. And so what happened when you hear this false diagnosis issue, there were a couple of patients that she thought they had markers for early onset Alzheimer's, but they didn't. They were convicted. So on New Year's Eve, I drove from Chicago to Atlanta to film this couple's last time at home. And then I drove Dr. Sherry Ann to federal prison at Alderson Federal Prison Camp. So 8 hours from Chicago to Atlanta, another 10 hours from Atlanta to West Virginia, and then back to Chicago. So this was my first time taking someone to federal prison. And I'm sharing this story with you because it's a really complex case, but it's also about an issue of compliance. And the compliance rules that the hospital was following seemed to be wrong. The employee's interpretation of what the compliance function was and what the compliance function actually was a problem. And so I'm trying not to tell you all the story but getting you interested. But it really goes to show you how important compliance is in an organization, because this couple is now in federal prison. And I had never visited Alderson Federal Prison Camp, and so it's the oldest federal prison camp for women in the United States. And so to be a part of someone's life and to be a part of the end of a journey where someone's going to spend 6 years in federal prison and you were there to see that person's last moments really makes you understand the importance of internal controls, compliance functions in organizations, and why they have to work and why everybody needs to care. Because this couple now is in federal prison. These are professional people that are in federal prison. So you have to watch the film when it comes out next year. Maybe we'll sit down and do this again and tell you more about it. But that's what I did at the beginning of this year.
Do we have a title for the project yet?
Truth Be Told. That's the name of the film right now. That's the working title, Truth Be Told. I don't think we'll change it, though.
Okay, and that's a documentary that people should be keeping an eye out for.
Keep an eye out. It's coming soon.
All right. Kelly, this has been so much fun. I feel like we could talk for another half hour, but I know you're here to meet some people, and I want to be respectful of your time. Thank you so much for sharing some of your time with me.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
You've been listening to another episode of Executive Platform's Blueprint podcast series. I've been Jeff Mix. Let's do it again soon.